Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 5 of Music is Not a Genre, Double Fives, oh man, I practiced this too, MxG, doing hand gestures instead of arm gestures. You gotta tell me if it's any better. It kinda still sucks, but I'm working on it. You know, it's like choreography. Thank you as always for watching and listening. Don't forget you can support this podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. I urge you to please go visit there. You will find so many exclusives and extra features and things that you don't get from this regular podcast right here. You can also support at anchor.fm/musicisnotagenre. And in both cases, whether you're Patreon for everything including rec music or Anchor for just the audio version of this podcast, you can start for as little as $5 a month. So we greatly appreciated. My public hub, as always, is youtube.com/Nick DiMatteo. And the website is nickdimatteo.com, where you get everything else I do besides music, podcasts, and acting and all of that stuff. And most but last, or whatever a better saying is, recarea.bandcamp.com. All of these links are at the end of this video. They're also in the text, whether you are listening or watching. All the links are here. recarea.bandcamp.com is where you will support and listen to my band REC's music, including our brand new album, RECcollection, the best of REC 2007 to 2020. That's my pitches. Thank you for listening, and let's get to the meat this week, Season 5, Episode 5. This episode is called Green Day, Proper and Punk. As you know, as always, I have fun kind of explaining why I name things the way I do. Maybe not always, but that's what I'm doing this season, so screw it, right? And you can probably guess why, and I'm going to get to that, but there's a little bit of controversy surrounding Green Day in their history. I don't think so much now, but historically there has been, although there are still some people who subscribe to that controversy or to that attitude and opinion, and I'll get to that in a second. But let me tell you exactly what's going to happen in this podcast. Some podcasts are a little more freewheeling than others. Some kind of write themselves. This mostly wrote itself. And most of what I'm going to do is just go through the discography. But first, a couple of little things here in the beginning. Green Day started in the West Coast, 1987. They have had the same three band members for over 30 years. They started out with a drummer, with Billy Joe Armstrong, real name as well, vocals, guitar, also the primary songwriter, primary singer certainly, and Mike Dirnt, who is Michael Ryan Pritchard, and he took on the name. The name Dirnt was given to him because he liked to play air bass and other stuff, and would make the sound Dirnt, 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 like that, and they said Mike Dirnt. So there you go. And he also does backup vocals. And those two started the band with a drummer named Raj Punjabi, who was then replaced by a guy named John Kiffmeyer, who ended up being on some of the early recordings, actually, and then left to go to college. And he was replaced by Trey Cool. Real name, Trey Cool. No, real name, Frank Edwin Wright III. Trey Cool, yes, definitely a better punk name. And it's pretty easy to explain. Trey is French for very, although it is spelled without the S in his case, I guess, to, make it different, and then cool is cool. So very cool, right? Drums, backup vocals, those same three guys for over 30 years, which is always, I think, wonderful in a band. There's a certain level of consistency that happens when the same members are there. If one changes here and there, sure, the sound might change a little, but the core of the band's still there, that's fine. If you only have one original member left, maybe you're recreating the sound at times, but if you're creating anything new, it's not really going to be like what the band is. So I admire and respect any bands who can stay together that long and have the same personnel. And they started with the name Sweet Children. I believe. God, I really need to organize these notes a little bit better. I'd show you my notes, But if you're just listening, you wouldn't see them anyway. And if you're watching, I'd have to turn this whole thing around. And as you can see, my setup is changing every week. We're trying different things, which can be very exciting. We don't know where it's going to end. We don't know what the rest of the season's going to look like. What you will find above, and yeah, I'm jumping around, is my new Rec Love Wall. You're only seeing the bottom of it because that's where the shot is. But that is almost all of the releases in my career as a musician, singer, songwriter, producer. And I kind of just like the idea of having them on the back wall of the studio/office here, and then just one of the custom speakers to my side. We'll see. I don't know where it's going. Anyway, back to this. They changed their band name to Green Day, which was a term exactly what you would think it is. Hey, I'm taking a Green Day, which means I'm just going to kind of, sit at home or hang with a friend and just smoke weed all day. At a time when, of course, weed was still widely illegal, completely illegal in this country, and frowned upon. It's still frowned upon by some very few people, but they seem to have lost this battle because weed is now legal. So basically every day here in New York, somewhere, many locations, is a Green Day. So congratulations, Green Day. Yeah. So now let me get to this real quick before I get to the, discography. And that is that the controversy here, and the reason why I called this punk and proper, or proper and punk, is that at a certain point in their career, Green Day were seen as sellouts and as not actually punk. The legend, John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, said that pop guys, they haven't earned the right to be punk. Now, I would love your opinion on this. I'd love to know what you think makes something punk. Because punk eventually, in some ways, it branches, offshoots, blah, blah, blah. That's why music is not a genre. Offshot into emo in some cases, or pop punk, as it can also be called. So you might have Blink-182 and bands like that. And that it's interesting because I think that punk is two different things. And those two things can be at once together or separate. And one is it's a sound, and two is it's an attitude. Yeah, it's a look, it's whatever. You can just break it down however you want. But I think as far as the music goes, it's a sound and it's an attitude. So the attitude is kind of, fuck you, we'll do whatever we want. We love what we do, but we don't care enough that you care. And we're going to make this stuff as simple as possible, but still put in everything we want to put in. Many bands, especially post-punk bands, expanded on that idea. So that's kind of the attitude. And the sound, of course, is fast and crunchy, and again, kind of scaled down in terms of complexity. There might be either some yelling or at least some loud singing. It's a fast, simple rock. And that, to me, is... those two things don't necessarily have to overlap. And I'll tell you a perfect example. I'm going to get to this later, too. There are artists whose attitude was super punk, anti-establishment, the whole thing, but whose sound was pretty straightforward, middle of the road, mellow, whatever. To me, that's not punk music. That is punk in attitude. And I say that because I am very punk in attitude, but most of what I do doesn't sound punk. Some of it does, and we'll get to that too, but most doesn't sound punk. But those artists, mellower, whatever you want to call it, are not strictly punk in terms of the music, which to me, that's where it really has to lie, is how does it sound? So when Johnny Rotten says, oh, Green Day's not punk, and he's going for they haven't earned it, whatever the hell that means, and they're too poppy. The reason why I disagree is there is no rule saying punk has to be non-pop or punk has to only tackle one subject in its lyrics or have even one attitude. There have been punk love songs. Let's face it. There have been, I think probably every subject has been covered in punk and post-punk It's now because it's been around forever, well, what, 45 years, I guess. And there are precursors to punk and kind of garage rock and other rock bands that date back, straight to at least the early 60s. So to me, it is the sound. It's the sound that makes punk. And the musical attitude, which is different from the attitude of the person or the lyrics, meaning it has to be somewhat in your face. And it has to have those certain elements of we care, but not that much, And one other thing, and there's been straight edge punk and blah, 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 and all these different, offshoots of punk. And this is where I just get sick of the whole idea of genre. And I really am in disagreement with people who say that something isn't something because it doesn't follow the rules. Because A, we make up the rules, or the industry makes up the rules. I find fans to be a little more rabid and stringent even than the industry in many cases. Those types of fans, heads, like punk heads, whatever. If that's what you're loyal to, and again, loyalty, whatever. Listen to what you want and love what you want. I also think that the idea of punk residing in the sound, and I guess I'm kind of stepping over my words here because I just get so emotional about this, and I'm restraining myself because this is a very positive podcast, But I don't like someone like Johnny Rotten saying, well, they didn't do this or they do this differently, so it's not punk. Isn't the whole idea of punk that there are no rules? Or that the old rules don't apply, and then all of a sudden it got codified and rules came about. Now, to me, the best music of any genre or type of music or whatever word you want to use is good songs that are well done, well performed, reasonably well produced. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't even have to be perfectly performed. But if the songs are good, then that's good music to me, and that can apply in every type of music that there is in the world. And that's where, hey, if the sound is punk, it's punk. If it's not, it's not. And I have to make that distinction. And if you're listening to the atmosphere in here, I don't have a studio that's soundproof, by the way. That is going to be your job. That's going to be my Patreon people helping me out here to afford a booth and the quietude of the perfect audio soundscape. Anyway, boy, this is a punk podcast right now because I'm just going off and saying whatever I want, whenever I want, apparently, and I've barely talked about Green Day yet. So I think I've made my point basically saying that yes, Green Day are punk because they have the sound of punk and that musical approach of punk and the force and dynamism and all of the things that make punk. And the fact that something is a well-written song or pop doesn't make it not punk. And the fact that something is just complete, craziness in terms of its composition or is yelled or the singer can't, carry a tune certainly doesn't make it not punk. That's part of the world too. So yes, Green Day is punk. They're still punk, no matter how many changes have happened. I would say that they're even more punk than, some of the pop punk bands out there. And then you have artists like the early Avril Lavigne who, cribbed punk, or even Olivia Rodrigo, who was done a little bit with that kind of punk or, grungy kind of sound, where you're taking on the patina of a different type of music. So if you're a pop artist who wants to add, Latin elements, doesn't make you a Latin artist. If you're a pop artist who adds punk elements, doesn't make you punk. So, and that's fine. It's still, that song may be punk. I'm just talking about what the artist is. And Green Day's always been punk because they've always done exactly what they wanted to do, and they've done it in largely a punk style. Largely. They have certainly done more than that. The discography that I've been talking about is starting right now. mark your, whatevers. It's about almost 15 minutes into this podcast. The first thing they recorded and released was something called 1,000 Hours in 1989. It was an EP. It was on Lookout Records, which was so huge in the punk world in the 80s and 90s. I bought several of their things. 39 Smooth the following year. That's 39/Smooth. Was their first full album. Also on Lookout Records. And I've listened to all of this. I've done their complete chronology. Don't necessarily remember all of it, but I remember thinking, oh, they were raw, and they had the energy, and they had the talent. Some of the songs were approaching like great songwriting, but in general, that was the thing that and kind of the recording quality is what needed to kind of come up, and did. That same year, Slappy, which I believe is an EP, contains a cover from another Lookout Records artist, Operation Ivy, who was one of my early faves as far as punk goes. And I call them second wave punk because first wave punk would be, Sex Pistols and The Clash and all that stuff. And second wave comes in the 80s. Sweet Children was another EP in 1990. And that's their original name, so that's why they call them that. They were already kind of looking back, which is something that Billy Joe Armstrong has done his entire career, and his lyrics has looked back. So I find kind of interesting he did it here. It also has a cover of The Who's My Generation, which proves something I've always believed, which is that The Who, like the Kinks, had elements of punk in what they did. Early on especially. They certainly morphed from there, but those first recordings. Even in some ways you could say the Beatles, but not quite. That very early, where they were just constantly performing in Germany and then went and did like an entire album in a day or two or whatever. But no, not really, But yes, the early Who, the Kinks, garage rock and other things you might want to call it. But there's a lot of proto-punk out there, just as there's a lot of proto-everything that came before the term was coined and the movement happened. 1991 was the last album to feature John Kiffmeyer on drums because it was a compilation, and it's called 1,039 Smoothed Out Slappy Hours, which if you were listening, you can tell that it was a compilation of their earlier EPs and stuff like that. The deluxe version of 1,039 Smoothed Out Slappy Hours, I've already forgotten the name. It has live tracks that were recorded at a radio station called WMMR, which is in Philadelphia. And when I found that out, when I did their chronology back in 2020, I believe, I flipped because I'm like, well, that was one of my favorite stations, as a kid and young adult. And MMR is still going strong and still playing very, very similar stuff, and and even come up to modern times. It's not just playing music from certain eras; it's playing everything that fits its format. That kind of rock, hard rock, whatever format. It used to compete with another Philly radio station called WYSP, but YSP a decade or more ago switched to all sports. And before that was kind of looking for a different identity anyway, so that competition ended. Neither of them beat DRE in my heart, but MMR, you got to give it props for being having the legacy that it does. So their last independently released album on Lookout was also in 1991. It was called Kerplunk. It was the first album Trey Cool appeared on, and has an early version of Welcome to Paradise. And this is where you really can see, they're not just riding on the energy of live performances. They want what they record to be lasting, to have substance to it. That goes, and not that the early stuff didn't, but not that anything doesn't, but that they have the kind of substance that reaches beyond what it seems to be, And I think that's what started in large part on Kerplunk. They signed to a major label and then were touring and getting stuff together. So their next album didn't come out until 94, and I have it here because it's the first thing I ever bought from Green Day. And of course, you know what it is if you're a Green Day fan. It is Dookie. One of the greatest albums of all time of any kind, I think. Longview, Welcome to Paradise, Basket Case. She sleeps in silence When I Come Around, the entire album is great, but those are just some of the highlights. And this is where the sellout thing started. I don't need to get into this anymore, except to say that to me, a true musical sellout is not somebody who wants to make money doing music they love and are passionate about, and or makes money off catalog, whatever. The Who aren't sellouts, despite the name of their album and despite their music being all over TV, like I guess it's CSI. I don't know. I don't watch those shows. That doesn't make them sellouts. They're allowed to make money on the stuff that they do. That's one of the great joys of being an artist, is making a living at it in some way and being able to pass that on to your loved ones, et cetera, however much you make. It's artists whose entire raison d'etre is to make money, is all they talk about is money. All they sing about often is money. And when they create something, they create it strictly to make money. That to me is a sellout. Now, they're not doing it because they're passionate about it. They're not passionate about the music. They're passionate about making the money. Now it doesn't mean, hey, they're making a living. So as far as just a person with integrity, sure, fine. They're being honest about it on the whole. But artistically, I think that to me is the only remaining definition of a sellout. It's not whether or not a band signs to a major label and makes money. I knew somebody who once said, when a band they like, an indie band they like, signs to a major label, they stop listening to them. And I stopped listening to that person. Not a coincidence. Anyway, that's all I'm saying about that. And Dookie was huge. It broke them, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows them, especially back then, because of Dookie. That's not completely why everybody still knows them today. Insomniac, 1995. They wanted to get this out right away and prove that they weren't just a, one hit album wonder. Brain Stew, Walking Contradiction, so many other great songs. This album has to me, a harder sound than Dookie, and that was by design. And here's something interesting. I've always been into a ton of different kinds of music. You may notice I only have 4 CDs stacked here. People listening, sorry. But yeah, 4 CDs. Because after Dookie, I might have shifted gears mentally, who knows. But I checked out. You like my punk hair? I did the best I could with the haircut I have. And again, sorry, just listeners. You'll have to tune in on patreon.com/musicisnotgenre to see what I look like. And I did not buy Insomniac. I didn't buy Nimrod. I didn't buy Warning. So I'm saying that right off the bat. I lost touch with them until another CD I hear, which I'll get to. Nimrod was 1997, which to me was, I'll call it their second pivot. The first pivot was on Kerplunk, where they were like, we need to turn this into something like I was talking about with Kerplunk and have great songs, etc. And Dookie was sort of the result of that pivoting. Nimrod was when they said, we can do things other than hard music, and they have Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, which is a huge hit for them. And I remember enjoying it even back then, even though I don't have the album. And they were showing a willingness to make punk whatever they wanted it to be. Is that not a punk song? I mean, you can argue yes or no there, but it's done by a punk band, and they are a punk band no matter what they do. So to me, it's still a punk song in a lot of ways, even though it's an acoustic song. Very diverse album, and just shows the strength of the songwriting increasing. It's everything, continually improving and getting better. Not that it wasn't great, already by then. 3 years go by and Warning comes out, and this is another move forward. I won't call it a giant pivot, because this to me was a continuation of what they were doing on Nimrod, which was exploring more acoustic, exploring more pop, an array of pop styles, throwing in more political stuff even. just adding more to what they do, which to me is a beautiful thing. It's always been a beautiful thing. And to me, this is also, you can see how this led to American Idiot. The certain content on Warning shows that that's kind of where they were headed if they so chose to, which they did. Then we get to something else in my collection. Boom. Green Day, International Super Hits. One of my favorite named greatest hits albums. 100%. Hey, I'll show you the back too. Why not? I can do it. And I bought it, pretty much right after it came out or soon after it came out, because I need to catch up. They're doing some interesting stuff, and it's one of the most listened through greatest hits albums ever. Really. Sure, greatest hits are supposed to be all the great stuff anyway. Doesn't necessarily mean every greatest hits album is something you can listen from beginning to end. This one is. This one absolutely is. And there's a couple new songs on there too, so worth checking out on your streaming service. Shenanigans in 2002 is a compilation, and I only mention it, and then you'll notice I'm not mentioning their live albums. I don't do live albums. I've talked about that before, unless it's like the one Roots live album or something significant like Chicago 4, This Shenanigans includes a cover of Tired of Waiting by the Kinks. Again, dead on choice. A choice. Showing that the Kinks had elements of punk. It's actually, for a while, it almost kind of sounds like the Kinks, but still, the more you listen, it has that, Green Day attitude. And that brings us to American Idiot, the third of 4 CDs that I own of theirs. The Bleeding Heart Grenade. Yep, that's awesome. And if you know Dookie, you know it because you're a fan who's been around for a while, or you went back and explored their stuff. If you know American Idiot, it's because you are above the age of 25, let's say, and are breathing and alive. Because that just absolutely revolutionized, I think, what we thought of as Green Day in 2004. And again, I don't need to go into this one the way I don't need to go into Dookie, because a lot's been said about it. It is not the first punk concept album. Some might say that the first punk concept album was an album called Zen Arcade by Husker Du, another early fave punk band of mine. A couple of years later, they released an album, forget the name of it. I'll do a Husker Du episode eventually. And there was a song on there, Could You Be the One, which I couldn't stop listening to. And I've followed Bob Mould as well ever since Husker Du broke up. But that has been said to be the first punk concept album. But American Idiot reminded people, or maybe the first time they ever learned it, that punk could be whatever it wanted to be, including progressive or concept-based, a rock opera, as they called it. It features most or all of the elements that they've had in previous incarnations. That's one of the things that makes it great. And to me, it's what made Green Day lasting legends. Dookie said they're a great band who will always have a place in history, and American Idiot said they will always be remembered, and always be respected and appreciated. Broadway, there was supposed to be a movie made. Apparently, that's been scrapped. But just the cast recording is even done well as far as sales and streams. Wake Me Up When September Ends is probably my favorite, but again, one of the albums you just listen from beginning to end, and you're supposed to because it's a concept album. And I prefer people do that with albums anyway. But if you're picking, choosing, which is also fun, any of the songs are worth picking and choosing. And so that was another huge pivot for them, which they continued on the last CD of theirs I own, 21st Century Breakdown, another rock opera. So this was 5 years later. My dog just sneezed. Bless you, Olga. And 21 Guns is probably my fave from that album. And it is their top performing album ever. as far as sales go. I don't know what it is as far as streams. It also won a Grammy, so huge. And I remember thinking, I like this a lot, and I like it better in hindsight. But that I waited 5 years, and they did another rock opera. Now, it's still great. And if American Idiot hadn't come out, maybe this is the one that may have sealed their legacy. It's that good. But I thought to myself, well, having heard their greatest hits and went back and listened to their albums, etc., and then American Idiot comes along, I expected them to pivot again. They didn't for 2009. And 3 years passed, which means I don't own any more of their CDs, because after, 2011, I hardly bought any. And 2012 comes along, and the restless souls that exist in Green Day, led by Billie Joe Armstrong, show that being a restless soul can be a wonderful thing, because it always pushes you forward. Oh, I did something great or good or worthwhile, or it satisfied me, or some people liked it. But I want to do something more, and I want to do something different. I want to do more great of the same, or I want to do something completely different. And that's why they keep pivoting. And this was another pivot for them, 2012. They released 3 albums, Uno, Dos, Tres, 3 different sonic styles, basically. And this is not an uncommon thing. There have been a lot of bands, especially in the modern era, who have released a ton of music in 1 year. Different albums with different sonic styles that remind you of anything. Maybe REC's 2020 magnum opus, The Weird Objective, 5 albums, EPs, all different styles. And at the time, I thought I was crazy, but I was going to do it anyway. And, of course, precursors like Green Day had done it before, along with so many other bands. I really enjoyed absorbing all of this, but I had trouble absorbing it all, because 3 albums in 1 year, tough to absorb. Not that I'm not looking forward to Red Hot Chili Peppers' second double album this year. Gonna kill that as soon as it comes out. But I was going through a lot in 2012. What can I say? And I did my best to absorb it all, but it was better listening in hindsight. For me, yet again, so many good and diverse songs on all of these albums. This Uno was power pop, so likely my favorite, because I'm an electro power pop guy. And it also, by design, these 3 had less heavy content than the previous 2 albums. There's some, seriousness on these, but they didn't want it to be a rock opera or things. They just wanted to make good music. Dos. It was garage rock. That was what they described as their garage rock album. And to me, there were certain elements of it that also kind of led to what they would release in 2020, that album, which I'll get to soon. And then Trey, which they described as epic stadium rock. And when you hear, X-Kid and other albums, other songs from that album, you can understand it has a melodrama to some of it, and a bigger sound, and more expansive, instrumentation and things like that. And it's a nice sonic break from the first 2, which had that harder quality, and great lyrics still. It's also more lyrically serious, which that kind of music kind of lends itself to that, so totally makes sense. 2014, they released Demolicious, which were demos of the Uno, Dos, Tres, which, funny, because Weird Objective, again, REC. Prior to that, I released a 2-volume set of demos called Music Is Not a Genre, but that was before this podcast came out. If you could look up, you would see it on my wall. I'm going to give you a little quick shot of it, okay? Boom. There it is. Yeah. Take a whatever. I don't know if I think I got the framing pretty much right. And that they were demos of what would become the Weird Objective. So again, artists, any of you out there who think, can I do this? Should I do this? Forget those questions and just do it, because A, it's probably been done before by somebody, and B, who cares? If that's what you feel, then do it. Yeah, that's punk. Revolution Radio came out in 2016, and that was a nice, tight album. and to show that kind of creative and sonic energy, almost 30 years into their career is just a beautiful thing, and I think it's in my top 3 as far as production sound, which I don't say a lot for the age of massive compression, which has been happening for 10, 15, probably 15 years now. But this one I think does qualify as one of the really well done, production-wise. Still Breathing is my favorite song from Revolution Radio and probably top 5 favorite Green Day songs, period. And that song showed that they could do emo, quote unquote, as well as Jimmy Eat World. It sounds like a Jimmy Eat World song in some ways. And some of those other bands, a little bit like At the Drive-In, stuff like that. This album added some electronic-y elements, which combined with what they did on Uno, I'll say, really created their next album, which is 2020's Father of All Motherfuckers. Yeah, I cursed. Fuck you. I cursed. I absolutely love this. I loved this album. It came at the right time for me. And it was, again, another pivot. Because they added certain pop elements they hadn't done before. And they added certain electronic elements they hadn't done before. They even sampled, quote unquote, Joan Jett's Do You Want to Touch on their song Oh Yeah, which I thought was a great callback for so many reasons. Meet Me on the Roof is infectious and a fun music video too. It was a renewal of their sound in a kind of way you want a long-term band to do, because it didn't. It's not trying to cash in on a trend or be hip to people who are listening to stuff only that only come out in the last 5 to 10 years. It's just exploring new sounds that came about after they started and after other things that they've done in a way that they're passionate about. They even have some kind of soul elements on there, which is, I think, again, really cool. And yet they still have their punk feel and the Green Day signature in so many. Fire, Ready, Aim. I did an episode on the Hives last season. I want you to go back and listen to the Hives. Please do. If you haven't, there's another band that's punk. It's a punk band, whatever else you want to say about a band from Sweden. And Fire Ready Aim just sounds like the Hives to me. It sounds like the Hives to me by a band who started, at least a decade, probably a decade before the Hives did. And then you have, I just want to mention these, same year, No Fun Mondays. And this almost slipped through the cracks for me. And then I was looking up cover songs with my wife and found this. It's an entire album of covers. And they're all very cool, some better than others, but the ones I like in particular are That Thing You Do, because it's an Adam Schlesinger song from Fountains of Wayne, great. Death is Dumb Subject, first one. Cool that they did that so they know that he existed and what a great song it was, a great writer he was. Kids in America, and it might have been a tribute because I believe it was done after his death. Kids in America, which has been covered before to varying degrees of success. I think Green Day was able to capture most of the original feel, but in their own way. And it's still Green Day, which is cool. And listen, anybody who does I Think We're Alone Now, which was, Tiffany, who covered, Tommy James and the Shondells? I can't remember. Kill me if I'm wrong, please. But it was a cover of a cover, and now it's a cover of a cover of a cover. Yeah, right? Great choice. And Manic Monday, right? The Bangles, or Prince via the Bangles, absolutely. But then he also did Give Me Some Truth, and this calls back to something I mentioned earlier. That is a John Lennon song. They make it a punk song. And that is not hard to do because the lyrics are super punk. The attitude is super punk. The artist, not punk. You wouldn't know what he would call Lennon punk. Even when he sang in that style, different sound, the whole thing. But the attitude was there, and they took it and made it into its essence anyway, which is a punk song, Two more things. One is, that ends the discography, except for the fact that apparently they're working on an album called 1972, the year all three of them were born, the year my brother was born as well. And it's supposed to come out next year, and I was so excited to hear this because, A, you didn't have to wait as long as it has been between other albums recently, And B, I just want to hear more Green Day, And there's so many legacy bands that are coming out with albums in the next year or two, and I'm very excited about it, and they're one of them. If you know anything about this album, I heard a clip of one of the songs, kind of hard to tell. It was meant to be deliberately obscure. But I'm still excited about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they pivot again or whatever it is they do. And then the last thing, of course, near and dear to my heart, is what song of mine has been influenced by Green Day? There have been a few. Brave the World, Stop It. But in particular, I'm going to mention one called 3 More Minutes from the album Synergy for the Weird. Also appears on RECcollection, The Best of Rec 2007-2020. Go to recarea.bandcamp.com. to check it out, or any streaming service that you use. It's everywhere. And 3 More Minutes is a song that is extremely twisty because, the first line is 3 more minutes, tick off the clock, and you're that much closer to checking out forever. So that's basically saying every minute goes by, you're closer to death, And it means that. It also means, and this is where I kind of twisted the meaning, and the whole idea is, not just that you're going to die eventually, but that sometimes you feel like you want to. And sometimes there are people who feel like they're going to do it themselves, i.e. suicide. And I make this case through the lyrics, especially towards the end, which is taking that idea of 3 minutes passing and saying, however you're feeling right now, give it 3 minutes. Let it pass. It's a takeoff on U2's Stuck in a Moment you can't get out of about Michael Hutchence. You get stuck in a moment, you don't know what can happen, good or bad. Give it 3 minutes. And then 3 more and 3 more and 3 more, and that's how the song ends. And it does the whole thing in an extremely high energy punk style. Stay tuned. In the next 30 seconds or so, you're going to hear the damn song. And please look it up in streaming. I put the link below. For Bandcamp in particular, but again, it's everywhere. Please patronize however you can. I always appreciate you watching and listening because my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you, and I will talk to you next week.
3 more minutes, tick off the clock, and you're that much closer to checking out forever. 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 Feeling that just won't go away. Well, is it possible that you're not very clever? There's a million ways to go, but only one to stay. Take your time, get it right, do it now. In the temporary world, there's only one conclusion. Arbitrary fact that you can't escape. It's natural to wanna rush to a solution, but there's a singular expression you can shape. Take your time, get it right, do it now, stop the fight. I shouldn't do it, but I'm gonna 'cause I wanna. But I'm gonna 'cause I wanna. Every last little thing you wanna do worth it? Stop the fight. Why do you even bother? But do you even bother to risk so much when you got so much? Give it a breath, give it time. Giving up is not the same as giving in, is why I'm telling you no. Give it 3 more minutes. Let it tick off the clock, yeah. No. Give it 3 more minutes. I swear the feeling will stop, yeah. No. Give it 3 more minutes. You cannot close that door, no. Give it 3 more minutes. 3 more and 3 more and 3 more and 3 more and 3 more. The clock, and you're that much closer to taking out forever, forever, forever.